In this video, for a change of scene and pace, I'm heading off to a motor racing event. A unique one that's held every summer here in southwest Wales, and whose exact timing depends not on the TV schedules, on the bank holidays, or even the weather, but on the tides. That event is the sand racing here at Pendine on the Carmarthenshire coast, organised by the Vintage Hot Rod Association. I was introduced to the world of vintage hot rods a while ago by my friend Bob, who owns a number of glorious cars, trucks and bikes from this era. And I love the look and sound, the history, the ingenious homebrew engineering and indeed the bravery. Bob doesn't race his cars, but he knows a whole bunch of people who do. So I've come down to meet some of them and follow their stories. To find out what a vintage hot rod actually is, I had a look at the membership eligibility criteria on the VHRA website. There's a lot of ifs and buts and maybes, but it boils down to, fundamentally, the sort of cars that you'd have seen racing in the California desert back in the 1940s and 50s. There are a few clear rules though. The cars have to be American, and at least one of the three main elements of the car, chassis, body or engine, must date from 1948 or earlier. You can have a later engine, but it has to at least look old. Simca carried on building the ubiquitous Ford flathead V8 engines under license for French army trucks right up until 1990, and those later units do count, although most people stick with the earlier Ford ones. The other big rule is that the build must be in the style, spirit and technology of the 1940s and 1950s. So things like modern disc brakes, carbon fibre aerofoils or electronic fuel injection would be obvious no-nos. And this rather rock and roll regulatory regime seems pretty much to work. It means the cars are all different, and there's a multitude of different racing classes by engine format, body type and so on. But they all very much share a look and mean a consistent vibe, if you like, a spirit of post-war farmyard welding, scrapyard scavenging and ingenious repurposing of bits of other old cars and often aircraft from the first half of the last century. I'm sure there are all sorts of rivalries going on here, but the atmosphere feels much more one of camaraderie. All the drivers are battling not so much each other as the elements, the sand, the reliability of mechanicals from 3/4 of a century ago, and the boundaries of their own wiliness, skill and nerve as a driver, race car designer, engineer, craftsman or craftswoman, and creative parts bin scavenger.
And then I got these from another newly.
Yeah, they're lovely, aren't they? I noticed those earlier.
Yeah. I think it'll work. I'm worried that on the return route they'll break off. So I bought a cold chisel, a brand new one. I'll shape it to the shape.
Yeah.
I'll hit it into a plasticine, make a mould, copy it in wood.
Yeah.
Hold the wood under, hit it, and make my own louvers. Yeah. And the more I f it up.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I had a normal track nose before, and it was always difficult to work on. When I had to do something, I had to dismantle everything, and I said, why don't I take a tractor nose with a flip?
Yeah.
And everybody said, are you crazy? Are you crazy? No, I'm not crazy. But I wanted to have a vintage one, so I was out and trying to find the real old one. And that was a bit of a challenge.
This is Andreas Ullstein, who runs a car restoration business called Coast Classics in Malaga in southern Spain, and who with his friend Ken Robinson take their two cars, Clyde, this is Clyde, and Bonnie, this is Bonnie, sand racing all over Europe. So it's a
Yeah,
1940
48.
Steyr.
Yeah, Steyr.
Yeah.
Steyr tractor. If you open the belt,
Yeah.
it can perfectly work.
How beautiful is that?
This beast is what's known as a belly tank, and it belongs to Jamie Williams. Belly tank cars were based on the usual period Ford chassis and flathead V8 engines, but had these streamlined bodies made out of the leftover long-range supplementary fuel tanks from World War II aircraft, in this case from a Lockheed P38 Lighting like this one. Back in the 1950s, these tanks were knocking around American scrapyards for a couple of dollars, but twin-prop fighter aircraft cast-offs aren't quite as common as they were 70 years ago, so Jamie has fabricated all this himself from sheet aluminium to a correct P38 drop tank pattern on an English wheel. It's an amazing job. Last year, Jamie got tantalisingly close to joining the exclusive 100 mph club with this car, with a recorded speed of 99.7 mph. I'm not exactly sure what you get for joining the 100 mph club. Bragging rights for sure, and a huge sense of achievement, of course. And there's a coveted t-shirt. Whatever it was enough to motivate Jamie to add this pitch-perfect hand-fabricated cowling for 2023 and a supercharger. Will that be enough to push him into the magic 3 figures? Bob also introduced me to Brett and Toby Pillinger, and also to Brett's wife Rachel. Brett is a very experienced hand at this game. Last year he was here with a belly tank a bit like Jamie's, and before that he used to race a 1923 Model T, and in fact still holds its class record at over 110 miles an hour. Until that car ejected him shoulder first through the stone balustrade of a French chateau outside Droitwich, as you do. But this year they've brought an entirely new car, and his son Toby is doing the driving. It doesn't look new, of course, but this time last year that aluminium bodywork was still the roof of an old caravan, and the inlet and exhaust manifolds on the 4-banger engine were destined for a cowshed.
I've had an immense amount of grief. I made that out of dairy bends for the milk industry.
And of course the car isn't new in the conventional sense, quite the opposite in fact, as it's actually built on a Ford Model T chassis that first saw the road in 1917, making it one of the oldest cars here. This car isn't likely to break the 100 mph barrier, or thankfully any ornamental masonry either, but they are hoping to make a good showing in the vintage 4-cylinder modified body class. This is only the 10th year that the VHRA has been running this event, but Pendine itself has a much longer history of motorsport than that. It's 6 miles of firm, flat sand looking out over the Bristol Channel, which has one of the largest ranges between high and low tide in the world. So the track conveniently gets resurfaced every single day, twice. In the 1920s it was the venue for a whole series of land speed records, and there's a newly rebuilt museum here all about it. Sir Malcolm Campbell was the first person to exceed 150 miles an hour here in Bluebird in 1925. G Parry-Thomas was the first to crack 170 the following year in Babs, his 27-litre aero-engine car. The two men continued to outdo each other. Campbell went even faster in February 1927 at almost 175, and Parry-Thomas was killed here a month later when his car rolled at high speed on its final run, attempting to beat him. After that, the record runs moved to America, to Daytona Beach and then Bonneville Salt Flats. And of course, it's in those American dry lake beds, mainly the ones just northeast of Los Angeles, that hot rod racing was born, using cars just like these. We don't need the dozens of miles of Daytona or Bonneville this weekend though, or even all of Pendine's 7 miles. here, there's a half-mile run-up, followed by a time recorded over a flying 1/16 of a mile. 1/16 of a mile is a hot dog with relish over 100 metres, but the VHRA doesn't hold with all that fancy French metric nonsense. The cars are all numbered and run sequentially. Every so often the runs stop while the cars that have collected at the far end convoy back here to the paddock. There are about 120 cars running, all but 3 of them Fords, by the way. That makes enough time for every car to have 5 runs split across the 2 days of the weekend. Saturday morning is overcast and moody, and there's been some rain overnight, the first for weeks. There's no actual rain falling though, and the beach quickly dries out as the tide sets off in the direction of North Devon, while a team of volunteers sets up the paddock and the fencing to keep the spectators on the right side of danger, and the cars start to emerge onto the sand. If you were expecting the starts to be as spectacular as on a conventional drag strip, then I suppose you might be slightly disappointed. With no tarmac, there's obviously no tyre smoke or squealing rubber. Cars only squeal their tyres on dirt surfaces in Hollywood. Plus the cars tend to be geared quite high so that they don't just dig themselves into a massive hole and go nowhere and destroy the track for everyone else. There's no standing quarter-mile time anyway. What matters is what speed you can get up to after half a mile, so nailing it the instant the flag falls doesn't really bring you anything. So, how did Brett and Toby's car get on?
Wow, the cable tie, I assume it said a 7, but it said a 3 after it. So I looked at it as I went through the start of the first trap. So I'd have been topping out, but the sand is so, the return road's mint. Yeah.
They ended up with a really strong result. 3rd in class out of 10, with Toby topping out at 73.68 miles an hour. Toby's driving was amazingly consistent over the 5 runs that they had, so a fine start to the Pendine racing career of both car and driver. Jamie, on the other hand, was not so happy. He had a reasonable first run that reached 97.74 mph, so not quite past the 100 miles an hour barrier. This did establish a new record for the vintage V8 flathead supercharged streamliner class, admittedly slightly helped by being the only vintage V8 flathead supercharged streamliner ever to have run here. On Jamie's second run though, bad luck struck. The car threw a rod through the cylinder block and limped back to the pits on 7 cylinders, and then onto its trailer and back to the workshop for some pretty major repairs. For a race that's dead flat, it certainly has its share of ups and downs. The cars may look shade tree shonky, but there's some serious engineering going on underneath. This year, David Solis set a new course record of over 130 miles an hour, which is an incredible speed for something that President Eisenhower would have called an old banger. On a beach. If you enjoy the noise and drama of big combustion engines and some fantastic old-fashioned blue-collar engineering and racing, then I can wholeheartedly recommend going along to this event. I was lucky enough to have a pit pass, and I'd really like to thank everybody who helped make that happen. But even if you don't have a pit pass, then it's still a great event to go and watch. If you turn up bright and early, then you can mingle with the cars before they go into the pits, and you can go all along the course at a safe distance, but close enough to the action to be able to watch and hear the whole thing unfold over the course of the weekend. Plus there's a mini classic car show all weekend just in the car park, which, by the way, is also on the beach. It costs a £5 all day, and there's no entry charge to the event beyond that parking charge. It's well worth a trip. Thanks also to Brett, Toby, Jamie, Andreas and all the other drivers who didn't mind me hovering about, to the VHRA for running the whole shebang, and to Bob for introducing me to the whole thing in the first place and feeding me some excellent sandwiches. Brett and Bob also helped me out with correcting some mistakes in a previous version of this video, but any that remain are entirely my fault. Bob and I are planning to put together a video on his fantastic 1933 Pontiac hot rod at some point over the summer, so if you don't want to miss that or anything else that's coming up on the channel with my own fleet and stuff, then by now you probably know which buttons you need to click on. But meanwhile, as always, thanks for watching.